think about your best friend and think about what that person means to you. It could be your sister or your partner, maybe someone who you met at work who you just click with. And think about all the things that you'd do for that person if they needed your help. Now, I have a friend, and her name is Rhonda. She's one of my best friends. She calls me on the phone to check up on me and puts me in a good mood almost immediately when I see her. She's always down to go out and get a glass of wine. She's a cat lover, a volunteer, and a mother. And much like a lot of your best friends out there, I'd do just about anything for her if she needed my help, maybe even deliver a TED Talk. So Rhonda and I met while I was working for an amazing Edmonton-based human rights organization that supports people who live with disabilities. And as many of you may have guessed, I worked in a supportive role for Rhonda. But Rhonda became someone much more important than that to me. She became really special. And we talk three times a week on the phone, and I really lean on her when times get tough. Rhonda changed my life. And all she asked for was some help around the house. I like to think that we're doing a lot for folks with disabilities. We've created vacuum cleaners that know their way around the house, and we've created thermostats that know what temperature we'd like the house at, and even smartphones that know the sound of our voice. And maybe one day, disabilities will be dissolved altogether through this type of technology as we add ability back into the lives of those who don't have it. Now, it'd be great to think that we created these marvelous inventions to create equality in our world. Not everyone has the ability to push the vacuum cleaner or to use the buttons on their smartphone. So this technology, like artificial intelligence and voice-assisted input and even automation, are really helping to close this ability gap, right? So today I'm going to talk about how some familiar technologies that we've seen on the previous slide are actually failing to close this ability gap. And I'm also going to talk about how some future technologies that maybe we're not as familiar with are actually widening this ability gap. It's really unfortunate. And they're going to continue to do so unless we fundamentally change the way that we think about ability in design. Because as it stands right now, folks with disabilities are just an afterthought. So I'm going to talk about three topics today. The first one is the technology of choice. The second is that humanity needs to fix humanity's problems. And the third is that universal design is going to outperform accessibility. So it's important for us to first consider what technological generation that we live in. So we live in what Italian design theorist Maurizio Morgantini would describe as the third technological generation. So the first generation was the prostheses of limbs. So these are tools to do the jobs of our hands and our feet. The second generation was the prostheses of their senses. These are things like televisions, telephones, things that do the jobs of our senses. Now, our generation right now is the third generation, the prostheses of the mind. And this is really rooted in our ability to reduce the physical requirements of intelligence down to almost nothingness through things like microprocessors. In a way, this technology is affording us our choice of consumption and our choice of experience. So what does this mean for the world that we live in right now? So we live in the digital age, and global content is allowing us a choice of what to consume on our phones and our computers on demand. Artificial intelligence is giving us the choice to decide whether we want to we want to process something or whether the computer is going to process it for us. And augmented reality is giving us a choice of experience. We can decide if we want to be somewhere else, we can be there virtually right now. So all three of these technologies are really creating the technology of choice. And choice is at the center of what it means to be an abled citizen, the choice to work, the choice to consume what we want, the choice to even change our appearance to match our personality. But the same choice doesn't exist for everyone, and folks with disabilities have a lot less choice than many of us. The stigmatization of disabilities removes fundamental choice from 190 million people globally that experience significant disabilities. So isn't this where technology is supposed to come in? Isn't technology supposed to close this ability gap? We may have been misled to believe that technology has a different role within our world. So the media has an obsession with assistive technologies, like that we see from bionic limbs being used by Paralympic athletes. And this really unfairly represents technology's role. I know that I'm guilty of seeing this technology on my computer or on the internet or the TV and thinking, we're really doing a lot for folks with disabilities. And it's not to knock this technology, it's really important. And right here in Edmonton, an amazing researcher, McNeil Carey, is doing a lot to create affordable prosthetic limb sensors. But there is an issue with this, and that is that it is prohibitively expensive to use this technology. Even the use of an average prosthetic can be $500,000 over the lifetime of the person who's using it. And so it seems to me that the only ability gap that this technology is really closing is that for those who can afford it. In the case of my friend Rhonda, shoes that are comfortable enough to walk in cost $2,000, and they wear out after a year. So for someone that's on AISH and doesn't have access to a lot of supports financially, this can be incredibly limiting. So if technology can't close this ability gap right now because it's prohibitively expensive, then what role will it play in the future? And unfortunately, it's not necessarily a good one. So transhumanization is the enhancement of the human body and mind above the species normal. And it's the enhancement of this body using technology. So it's speculated that genetic manipulation and pharmaceuticals and implants will all play a role in creating new benchmarks that we need to live up to. So if you take an able-bodied person and you enhance them above the species normal to this state of superhuman, folks that have species normal ability will experience a lot of the same things that people with disabilities feel right now, namely stigmatization and a lack of choice. There's another problem with this technology, and that it's not transferable. So it'll be impossible for me to donate my enhanced genes to someone with a disability in the same way that I can right now with my smartphone or maybe my old laptop. So in the wise words of Google's CEO, technology can't fix humanity's problems. Humanity needs to fix humanity's problems. It doesn't seem like we can tech our way out of this problem. And so it leads us to look at what humanizing technologies exist. So ableism, much like racism or sexism, is the discrimination of folks based on their ability. So for a variety of reasons, product and organizational and architectural design has been severely lacking in consideration of ability. So when we look at what this looks like within our world right now, and we look at the benchmarks that are created between the species normal and designed for the masses, and then our adaptations of those designs, we find accessibility. And accessibility includes all manner of handicapped parking stalls or the desks at the front of the classroom that are wheelchair accessible, or even accessibility ramps like we see right here. And the problem with accessibility is that it's an afterthought. And quite frankly, it's a little bit outdated. So the parking lot was designed for normal-sized cars, and the classroom's designed for our standard chairs and desks, even like we have here. And this set of stairs was obviously designed for folks with normal ability and people who can walk up and down them freely with their legs. But what if folks with disabilities weren't just an afterthought? And Ron Mace's practice of universal design has been gaining a lot of traction. So universal design is the design of products and spaces to be used by the greatest number of people possible, and by people of all potential abilities. Universal design can be applied to just about anything that we use. And what it does is it creates a more socially integrated world by physically integrating folks of all abilities from the onset. So what are some things that we can do right now to fight ableism? And the first thing is to be critical of what the media is telling us about technology. We need to consider whether these technologies are aligned with people's financial accessibility and whether these technologies are transferable. Secondly, don't accommodate and don't make accessible. Instead, design for all potential abilities. You may not be designing the next device to be reviewed on Tech Radar, but that doesn't mean that we can't apply these principles of universal design to organizational processes or interior spaces or even communication channels. And the more that we incorporate folks of all abilities, the more that we honor diversity in our world, and the more that we promote choice for all people. And lastly, we need to change the conversation about ability. We all have a complex set of psychological, physical, social, and spiritual needs, and we all have varying ability within each one of these categories. Much like different races or ages or sexes, we all have different abilities, and the more that we use this language, the more that we legitimize ableism. And this is really important because currently only 1% of research in discrimination is within the topic of ableism. So it's my hope that we can be critical of technology's role and continue to design a world where the ability gap is closed and folks of all abilities, and even my friend Rhonda, can be considered from the start instead of just being an afterthought. Thank you.